Hi, my name is Clara. I am an artist and a teacher living and working in Houston, Texas. But I am not from Texas, in case you cannot tell. I don't have any accent. I am from Chicago, and I have lived in a few different places before I moved here. Let me think, how do I begin to describe my trajectory? I've lived in the Dominican Republic for a while. I lived in Georgia. I went to graduate school at the University of Georgia in Athens. And then I lived in Montana for a little bit, for about 6 months before I moved here to Texas. I moved here for a residency at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. Maybe some of you have heard of that program. And I stayed because I got a lot of professional opportunities through that university. Through that residency. And so now I actually teach at the Museum of Fine Art and at Houston Community College. And I teach ceramics at both of those institutions. So that's a little bit about myself, just really kind of briefly. So let's dive right into talking about my work. There's one really integral thing that I like people to know about me when they're looking at my work, and that is, again, that I am from Chicago. A lot of the visual language that you see in my work comes from the fact that I moved away from Chicago at a really crucial point in my art career and in my life. And once I was very far away from that city, it became very clear to me that the architecture in that city and my time in that city played a pretty important role in defining who I am, and moreover, what kind of work I like to make. And so you can see that architectural language really readily apparent in both the drawings on the wall and the sculptures that you see on the floor here. What I'll do, let me talk a little bit about the content of my work, and then we'll get into the process of my work, because I know a lot of you guys seem really interested in the process also. So to start out, I always like to start with a quote. We shape our dwellings, and afterwards our dwellings shape us. That was spoken by Winston Churchill in, I believe, 1944. I love that quote, not just because of the particulars of that history, but also because of the way that it describes this relationship with the built environment that I think is very poignant. When we talk about building buildings and how that reflects us, or moreover how our bodies are in and of itself these really complex structures that I like to think of the same way one might think about the complexity of a building or the complexity and the network of a city. And so there's that duality there, that comparison that I find really easy to bridge that in my mind. And so creating those kinds of complicated relationships between body parts and buildings, again, both in my drawings and my sculptures, is a really fun experience for me. I like to use an architectural language, again, to describe how people are built. So there's a literal way that your veins are like highways, that kind of thing. There's also a very metaphorical way that we can talk about a building as being strong or being, fragile, and how that can relate to both our physical human experience in our bodies, and then in a more emotional experience of, how are we vulnerable, how are we strong mentally. And so that's something that's really important and interesting to talk about for me in my work, is that physical and that sort of more emotional or metaphorical meaning there. In my work, I also like to think of people as being greater than the sum of their parts. And so in my work, you can see there's a very fragmented feeling to most of, if not all of, the work here. And that's actually literal. I build these parts separately, and I glue them together afterwards. And I like to think of that physical process as having a very real connection to the concepts behind my work, that people are fragmented, that we are put together from all of these different experiences in all of these different places, and how that comes together to make a really unique person is important. And so if I have forms that are really similar looking, but then when I put them together, pair them with different forms, they make very unique sculptures in that same way we are all incredibly unique. And so the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, like a building or like a city. In my work, there's a very humanist perspective. I really care about people. I always have. I value the goodness of human beings. I'm obviously kind of a positive person in that sense. And I like to think of people as being inherently hopefully good. And that also involves thinking a lot about common human needs, things that we need to take care of each other. We need clean water. We need a roof over our heads, things like that. And so then the one kind of thing about that also involves kind of embracing that human imperfection, that knowing people are good, but also being willing to accept when people aren't perfect. And so, I like, in all of my work, I like to juxtapose beauty and ugliness. I like to juxtapose balance with discord. That's a really big one, actually. In all of my pieces, you can see this way where, some of them really look like they're about to topple over. And I've had a number of people who, when I was at the craft center, would visit my studio and would get incredibly nervous with the way I move around my work. These pieces are all incredibly, incredibly sturdy, even if they don't look like it. And I build them intentionally that way. In fact, even some of them, the ones that are on these kind of steel cables, don't touch them. But if you were to touch them, they would move a little bit, they would sway a little bit, but they would not fall over because I build them to have that sort of almost like a little bit of a safety net built into them. So they're actually quite strong. You're not going anywhere. And I like to think of people that way also, like, how do we maintain our balance? How do we keep ourselves afloat, kind of keep our head above water almost? And then, of course, that also involves kind of this almost way of thinking about how a person can transcend their body or transcend their being versus something much more mundane. And so that particular idea, it takes more root in like juxtaposing this more kind of ordinary looking housing, or like it's almost kind of references slums or favelas that you might see in the Dominican Republic or Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And then juxtaposing that with some very, kind of much bigger, much more celebratory or gargantuan, massive skyscrapers that all kind of bloom, in this case, out of this guy's head. So that's that. I probably shouldn't turn my back to the camera, should I? Okay, so I guess we should do questions at the end, right? Yes. That's how that would work, questions at the end. Within that, all of that process, and I'll talk about the physical process of building these in a minute. Within that, what I really want to do with this work, so everything I just kind of said, is that I strive in my own work to understand the world, both understand individuals and understand this bigger, kind of, in my opinion, really complex and often kind of overwhelming world that we live in. And because we are such a global society nowadays, that it's even more important than ever before to, just kind of see a bigger picture to things. And so I like to celebrate and study and contemplate that complex social, complex economic, complex political landscape. I like to take things at face value. There's the good and the bad. And that involves a global perspective. It involves, essentially kind of illustrating an urban experience, which, for me growing up in Chicago is really important, and so much of us live in an urban way nowadays. And then there's also the sense of accumulation and balance. Again, the way that a city just keeps growing and growing. And Houston is actually a great example because of how fast it grows, how big it is now, and how in a certain way the city might not be prepared for all of the people that are just constantly coming into it, that influx. So in my work, I just try to understand the world. And the point where this gets, there's this interesting way that I, basically when I was in undergraduate, when I was getting a ceramics degree from the University of Illinois, I was also studying art history. I was specifically really interested in African art objects, Central and South American art objects, and Byzantine and like kind of pre-Renaissance early Christian iconography. How that translates into my work probably isn't particularly literal. You guys might not get that initially from looking at any of these pieces. But what's important to understand is that what I'm coming from is this idea that an object can have power. And that an object can have that power because it helps an individual or helps a community clarify the world, understand the world around them, specifically the parts of the world that may be confusing or difficult to understand. And so what that all boils down to is that for me, I see these objects as a continuation of a very long history of object making that involves, struggling to understand the world, struggling to come to terms with things that may be kind of overwhelming or things that may be very beautiful. So that's that. Let's keep going. So again, from African cultural objects to early, Christian icons, I enjoy thinking about that power in the unknown, again, kind of big, confusing world. And so then that fragmentation becomes really important. as a way to see life, as a way to like relate to each other. And then my work is a continuation of those objects. So let's talk about my process for a little bit. Because you can look at the drawings and you can look at the sculptures, and there's obviously, a sense of continuity between them, that there's a shared visual language, but they are very different from each other. When I started graduate school, I was a figure sculptor, and I was a very, really into that, and I've never really quit making figures completely. But when I started graduate school, my architectural language was only a small part of, really, or even not a part of my bigger visual language. And so I would build a figure that maybe had a skyscraper sprouting out of his shoulder. But there wasn't anything particularly cohesive in how I was using buildings to talk about people. And there was some point, remember, I'm in Georgia, I had just moved away from Chicago, never really had been that far away from the city before, and about halfway through my graduate experience, I just hit a wall completely with my work. I had no idea where my sculptures were going. And it was at that moment of really, literally, like, no idea what I'm going to do. I just started drawing, and all of this stuff came out. All of this visual language from my time in the Dominican Republic, from living in Chicago. You can see skyscrapers. You can see what I consider to be kind of smaller units of housing that would either represent little apartments in Chicago, or, like I said, the architecture of Santiago or Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. Or even other things such as Mesa Verde, so the sense of ruins and the sense of time compressing on itself in history. And so all of these things are very present in my drawings. Of course, when I started drawing like that, it took a while for me to figure out how to actually incorporate that into my work. And so the sculptures that you see here are they're pieces that I've made over the course of maybe the last 14 or 15 months. And they are, this slow progression of me figuring out how to take that visual language from my drawings and incorporate it into my sculptures. Some of my sculptures are more intricate and have a lot of scaffolding, like this piece here. Others are a little bit more muscular, a little bit less dense, have a lot more negative space in them. And so, that's something, again, continuing to work through that. When I started drawing, my drawings informed the visual language for my sculptures. At this point now, I've been drawing for a few years. I graduated from graduate school in 2013, so I've been drawing these types of pictures now for about 3.5 years. And at this point now, it's a push and a pull. My sculptures inform my drawings just as much as my drawings inform my sculptures. What next? When I work, so let me talk, when I make my drawings, what I like to do is I'll start with a really quick, almost a kind of gestural study of architecture. I'll either use India ink or coffee. I love drawing with coffee. Anyone who has never tried it before, just go for it. It's really, really fun. When the coffee dries, it stains the paper, but it is a really long-lasting, material. It's not going to really go away over time because it's essentially stained the paper. And then from there, once I get that kind of gesture down, I work back in and I sort of find the architecture. So for example, with this piece, I find that building there and define that other building. And so it's sort of a process of discovery, and I intentionally do that. I set that up for myself because I get a lot of pleasure from working that way. What that then means, of course, is that sense of discovery translates into my sculptures also. When I work, I like to build my figures in parts. And so I start with different ceramic components, some of which are actually quite easy and quite fast to make. I make all those parts separately. I fire them in a kiln separately. And then once they're bisque fired through that first firing, I lay them all out on a blanket before me, and I actually it's kind of like making a collage. I put pieces together, I change pieces, switch pieces around, and I find something that I like visually. And then from there, I continue by working out a color palette, glazing and firing those parts separately, and then gluing them all together afterwards with a lot of materials that you would actually find in a building. So things like mortar and concrete and construction adhesive and epoxy. And so again, all these pieces are incredibly strong, even though they look like they're going to fall apart at any moment. And that's in part because I use materials that are incredibly strong to build these pieces. So that's a little insight into my process. might be a good idea to open, can we open the floor up to Q&A now?
Yeah, of course.
Great, okay, so at this point, please flood me with questions. Just ask me anything.
Where did you get the inspiration for this vague man we keep seeing?
For which man?
Like this gentleman or this?
Oh, actually, that's a really good question. So it comes from a couple different places. One is this film that I love called The Passion of Joan of Arc. It's a very, very old film that's actually been, the Roger de Hubert Foundation, they fixed Olympic movie stuff. And so that film was, it was fixed up. You can see it online. It's the story of Joan of Arc when she's on trial. And her inquisitors she's very young, very innocent looking, and her inquisitors are these very kind of haggard looking old men. And the faces in that film, it's just the whole film is just like close-ups of people's faces, and her inquisitors are just so gnarly looking. And I like that. I like that sense of age, and I like that type of, maybe ugliness isn't the right word, but that sense, that kind of imperfection. And then also these guys are like, they're being mean, like they're doing something mean to her. And so again, I feel like it just really kind of embodies this human imperfection that I enjoy talking about in my work. And so a lot of the time my figures do end up being old men. This particular face right here, I've used this face a few times in my pieces. I really like to go back to it, and I'm not sure why. And to be 100% honest, Google search. I just found that face on Google search. I actually like to use Google a lot to find the references that I use in my work. And I'll do this thing where I'll just Google something, and then I'll just flip through every picture, and I'll draw every picture. And it's a really nice kind of drawing study that I like to do. So yeah. Did that answer? I'm sorry, did I answer your question? Okay, great. Good. Yes, ma'am.
A question about the man. When you put him together, did you fire just him and then glue onto him? So that's all the pieces?
So,
I'm just saying that's kind of a yes/no question.
No, that's actually a really good question. And so let's talk about this guy for a minute, because this guy's kind of the exception to the rule. All of these pieces are built in multiple parts, but this guy's actually not. This is one piece. And so that's it's a very recent piece that I've made. And it's kind of a point of departure from my other work where everything is much more fragmented. Multiple pieces are getting fired separately and glued together. In this piece, I actually did build him in one piece. And the specific reason for that is that this housing, I build this housing a very particular way. What I do is I start solid, or I start with really thick clay. Like I'll build the coils of clay about, maybe 2 or 3 inches thick. And I push and pull the clay with my fingers to begin to define the really basic shapes of those buildings. And then I come back in with wooden tools that have flat, angular sides to them to begin to really push and define all the sides of those buildings. Once I do that, I can use a little knife to make stairs, and I use little wooden chopsticks to make the windows. And then, and this is kind of like scary to think about, but I basically cut this piece apart, I hollow out all the inside, and then I put it back together. So it's a really complex process that still does involve a lot of fragmentation, because I'm literally cutting this guy apart. But then what goes through the kiln is the final finished piece that is put back together. So that's a really good question, and this is actually the only piece in the show that is not in parts. Another one that's pretty close is that piece right there, which is called Pile. The buildings on that piece are also built the same way, where it was solid clay, sculpted, pushed all those parts, cut it apart and hollowed that clay out, and then put it back together. And you can see that it's a little fragmented. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 parts to it. But that architecture at the top is all one part. And then there are the 3 other parts. There's the leg and kind of those 2 other little cylindrical type things. So that piece kind of is more like this piece.
Is there a certain type of clay that you particularly like?
No. I use any clay depending on what kinds of colors I want to get. What my firing range is. So I'll make clay decisions based on that, based on color, based on temperature, what kind of firing I'm doing. Like if I were doing a wood firing or a soda firing, which for those of you that don't take ceramics, those are just different types of things you can do in a kiln, basically.
So you like to do all different types of...
All different types of clay.
So you like to mix?
Yes, absolutely. One thing that I do also look for in a clay body is I like to find clays, so like depending if I'm making something more sculptural, like for these pieces that are kind of like these tall, slender slabs, I like to have a sculptural clay body that's going to be nice and strong while I'm building it, but that will also be strong enough after it's fired, so you know, they'll kind of melt together enough. For these pieces, I also like to have a more sculptural clay body, but then there are other things like little long, slender parts where I'll pick different clays for that. And I like to have a clay that's easy, you know, that I can kind of easily connect things with. So I guess how would I explain that? It's kind of, it gets a lot into the chemistry of ceramics, but there are certain clay bodies that I like using more than others because they're a little more porous and they're easier to stick parts together because of that. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Great, okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, porcelain. Do you ever use porcelain sometimes?
You know, I don't, but I really want to. I keep on thinking that I want to start working with porcelain more. And it's, you know, I've got like 1,000 pounds of this really kind of groggy brown clay that I'm going to use, and then I'm probably going to start playing around with porcelain a little bit after that. So yes and no is a good answer. Did I yes, ma'am.
Answer her, so she's had her hand in water to be.
Oh, that's
I have to touch it back so to her, you know, we were first watching that, the first piece of art. What triggers, what sparks your creativity? Is it based on a feeling or is it based on research? Because obviously you cannot wait for the music to come to you. You have to, it's a discipline.
Sometimes I have to wait. Yeah, sometimes I have to wait. I have days in my studio where I just sit there and I just look at everything and I'm just like, I can't do it. And then there are other days where it's just like, it's like kind of overwhelming how much I feel and how much I want to make. And so that's a really good question. Obviously a little bit of both. Research is an important part of my work. But yeah, so it's just that feeling. One thing that I do have, and I think most artists have this, is this need to be in the studio, this need to make. And at this point now, to be honest, like I set this show up, and then the semester started, and I haven't had a lot of time in my studio, and I'm really feeling it. It's hard to not make something for a week or two. And so that's a big part of it. It's almost just kind of a compulsion to make things. So yeah, I would say it's both. Research, obsessive compulsive, or just compulsion to make, they definitely go together.
But you would say that most of it, I mean, talking about percentages, the majority of the percentage of your work comes actually from the...
Probably more compulsion. If I had to give it like a percentage, it might be like 20-25% research, 75% compulsion. Because most of that is, because I can not do research and still just feel really like I need to make things. And so that would be a good breakdown probably.
It's awesome.
Thank you. That's just awesome. Thank you.
I have kind of like a technical question. What is your trial and error process like for finding that physical sturdiness and balance?
Good question. That's an awesome question. I've had pieces like fall down and break on me. Yeah, totally. And I've like left pieces like with glue, like okay, like leave you in the studio, like I'm gonna go home now, and then come back the next day, and like totally just like on the floor, like something bad happened. And one thing I will say though is that if you, like any process and like any technique, I've gotten to a point now where I have, technically gotten pretty good at knowing how to make it so that it's going to stay. In terms of that balance, a lot of it is design-oriented principles. So I'm thinking about like the center of gravity, but also thinking of like, for example, like asymmetrical balance. If we look at this piece, obviously it's asymmetrical, and like how do you balance it? Even how do I like placing it, figuring out its specific placement related to that concrete block that's holding it up. It's just a matter of developing that eye, figuring that out.
Working with weight is pretty difficult in some cases.
Weight can be difficult. That's one thing that I've been working through the last year or so is trying to make my work much more lightweight. So a piece like that, there's a lot of this place scaffolding is pretty solid, and so this is actually a pretty heavy piece. But as I've been building thinner walls, which again, it's a bit of a compulsive, like I'll just keep hollowing something out until I cut through it. But so that compulsiveness, that has made my work much more lightweight. So like a piece in the back, for example, that Sebastian piece there, that's pierced with nails, that piece is incredibly lightweight. And it may not look like it, because it is kind of half, like, I mean, that torso is kind of hefty, but it's a very, the working for it. It's hard to pinpoint. Which one?
Who's Sebastian?
Oh, like Saint Sebastian. So Saint Sebastian was a saint who it's, you know.
Oh, Saint Sebastian.
Saint Sebastian,
Okay.
yes. They ended up like shooting arrows.
Okay, yeah.
So those nails are kind of interesting though. I found those nails at a junk shop in the Heights area, and they're like from a house in Houston from the 18th century or 19th century that was torn down. They were super rusty when I found them, so I had to clean all the rust off of them. And so there is a local element to that piece, and even if you think of how fast Houston is changing, and how a lot of people are kind of upset about the loss of that sort of mood and feel. That's a house that got torn down a really, really long time ago, but that same process, that same action is still happening with really big consequences for the city and the future of the city. So we could talk at length about that.
Yeah, no,
It's
because I was
really
really
complicated.
curious, I guess, because in our class, it was all about building, but I know that part of it is experience, and then part of it is getting a technique, but it's also knowing the materials, but it's
Yeah,
just
it's a lot.
interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing is, that's probably important, and this is true for any kind of art making, any kind of thing, is that there are points where you might look at something, anything, and think oh, this is really easy to make, or oh, that probably took no time at all, and it actually took a lot of time to make. I spend hours in my studio just working through, specifically how exactly something's gonna go, how exactly something's gonna look. Is it gonna do balance? Will it stand up on its own? If not, how am I gonna resolve that and make it stand up? So things like that are, I spend a lot of time in my studio working on that stuff.
So I've noticed a lot of your drawings don't incorporate the figure, and you said that you've mostly done figurative work in your clay.
Yeah.
Have you ever departed completely from the figure in clay?
I did a little bit for my thesis show when I was in grad school, and that was again, so timeline-wise, I had been drawing, and my drawings were kind of like this, and I felt like to resolve that visual language, that architectural visual language, and really make strides in how I was integrating the architecture into my sculptures, I had to abandon the figure for a while. And I made work that I'm really proud of for my thesis show, but I pretty quickly realized that the figure was a very, very integral part of what I'm trying to say with my work. And so I returned to the figure pretty quickly after my thesis show. I would say that work is really the only work that I've ever made where there's a lot of architecture, but not really any human bodies. So, good question. Yes?
Okay, when you construct these, you're using an armature, or you're constructing flat?
No armature. I use armatures for a few things. So when I'm building solid, and sculpting these kinds of cities, I'll use an armature for that. And then other things, I might need an armature sometimes to hold up a piece that I'm gluing together. So that's most of, when I say I use armatures, that's what I'm looking for. But something like this, for example, I don't use an armature to build this whole thing and then take it apart and put it back together. I actually just build these parts separately. And then it's once they're bisque fired that I start laying them out and figuring out that composition. So when they're actually wet clay, I don't always have a specific idea of what the composition will be.
So when you're pulling these together, this piece is it flat or is it upright?
Oh, no, that's a good question too. I compose them flat, but then I put them together upright.
So the base would come last.
Oh, no, the base would be first. Okay. Yeah, the base is first. So I'll have the legs, build, this guy, build. Yeah, so the legs will, I think with maybe one or two exceptions, will always be first.
So this comes first.
So yeah, this steel, these guys. The only exception to that is this piece over here. Can we move it? Oh, awesome. So this piece over here, I started it with the intention of it sitting flat here. And then I think I added on this piece, and then it still wasn't enough. And so this piece was very difficult to manage because I already had all of this part finished, and then I added legs onto it and resolved the base. But for the most part, it is always from the bottom up, legs to head.
Is that ironwork in the bottom? You know,
Oh, that's just steel. Yeah, those are just steel rods.
so it's coming out of the concrete.
Yeah.
You fire it, you fire the
Those aren't
steel.
fired. Those are not fired.
How do you get this into this?
Oh,
Is it in or is it out?
Yeah, no, it's in there, like embedded in there. I just like drill a hole with a little,
And then-
concrete drill bit,
Yes,
and then
and then you-
I actually just use more. I just use more concrete or mortar to like. Yeah, it's just they're in there.
Same kind of fence.
Exactly. Yeah. I was thinking it. Same as like putting up a big concrete, putting up a post or something.
I noticed that the guys that you have all seem to be Caucasians. What does that say about your, you? Is that your
No,
experience? Is
that's
that
actually
what
a
you
really-
think of like in the business world or?
No. That's actually a really complicated issue that I don't have a lot of answers for you in my work. But I actually do have. I have one piece that I made a while ago that I do think of as being a black guy, as being an African American guy. I actually also do. I think of this piece as being an African American person. And yeah, that's a really good question that I don't really have an answer for. So.
I just think it's kind of funny that he's like a figurehead. When I look at the Caucasian man, I think
Yeah.
that's kind of really appropriate because you have all the workers, and the workers who actually physically build the buildings are not typically Caucasians, especially in this
No,
area.
or like-
they're not
especially
doing
if you go to, like,
the
the
labor,
area.
and yet you
It's-
have
yeah.
the white male, middle-aged guy who's kind of like the poor, that's what you see.
Well, and there's this complicated way. So one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is like to look at that piece versus this piece, where like here, the architecture is actually like the body, and so what that says about the human body, what that says about the human condition, versus this piece where it's growing out of the head almost a little bit more like if it were a cancer or something, or a big like fat goiter on his head. And so we can begin to talk a lot about race relations and poverty, and I like, it's almost like too much to begin to get into all those things and have like a forum about it here. But that, you bring up a good question that I really do like seeing when my work, brings people to that point where they start thinking about really serious, things in our society that have really serious consequences sometimes. So things like poverty and gentrification and, just even like income disparity, things like that.
I just think for your background being in the Dominican Republic,
Yes.
it would have really have been in your face.
Yeah. Absolutely, and the work that I was doing in the Dominican Republic was specifically bringing clean water to underserved communities. I was working with a nonprofit that makes ceramic water filters, and so just seeing what a complex issue that is in just one small part of the world, to have a much bigger global perspective on something like that is, it's really complicated, and it was a very heartbreaking experience being there. But also there was a lot of beauty and a lot of, promise for the future. So so I'm happy my work like got you there. That's what I look for. Is I look for people beginning to think about those things, beginning to question. How is the world built? Which I think maybe a good way to end might be to talk about the title of my show, Iconoclast. For those of you that understand the word, if you don't, I'll just give like a really brief little description. It's like a word that's used to describe, in a literal sense, someone who destroys, an icon or an object of worship, usually associated with religion. But I even think of like the fall of the Soviet Union. When I think of iconoclasts, or think of that kind of destroying upheaval within a group and subsequent, kind of destroying your idols, so to say. But what that also can mean is a person who, either defies or works against either the status quo or like a sort of embraced cultural norm. And what I like to think about in my work, or what I hope that viewers come to, is this way of reevaluating how we consider each other, how we think about people, and how we think about the bigger world, and how we think about change. So those are, and then the word itself in the title, icon/O class, I wanted to break up that work the same way that my pieces are broken up. So literally footnotes in that word. So is that, okay, cool. Does anyone have any more questions or
Behind you.
I have a really weird question. So I write a lot, and with each character that I write about, they like become a person to me.
Yeah,
So did these become people to you? Did you
absolutely, yeah.
do they like male and female and like personalities?
Yeah, they're mostly male. Like, so that one's a girl. That one's a girl, that one's a boy. That one might, I don't know. It's that one could be either. That one's guy. That one I'm not sure of. That one's probably a girl. Yeah, so they all have personalities. Absolutely. When yeah, sometimes at night, when I'm like alone in my studio, I'll kind of like, it's like I kind of like talk to them. It's like I don't want to make myself sound kind of creepy.
No, I think when I'm in the midst
Yeah.
of like a book that I'm not writing, but whatever, I always ask myself, like, what would such and such character do? Like, I have a girl named Rowan, and she's like my badass self, and so I wonder if that translates as well when you're creating them.
I'm not sure if I asked what they would do, because for me they are kind of more like symbolic of like the world in a funny kind of way, but as individual personalities, like when I go home at night and I leave my studio, I'm always kind of like, hey guys, like I love you, don't be good, I'll be back soon, don't fall down, like don't have any trouble, like God, well I'm gone. So that's something that I definitely, they are very much like people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad it goes both ways on physical eye and in your head.
More questions?
Okay, you told me about growing up in Chicago, but are you sure you're not a fan of Star Trek?
Oh, I love Star Trek. Actually, my mom will laugh. I had a little Star Trek like thing for a minute. So I'm through the initial stage of it, but like yeah, I totally like maybe like 4 months ago I got really into Star Trek. And like I had never really watched it before, and I was just like, how did I never loved this? It's amazing. Yeah, I like Star Trek. I mean, there's this kind of weird like go where no man has gone before, and we're gonna bring good to. It's like that can be a problematic way of thinking sometimes, but like for the most part, like yeah, I think Star Trek is a really adorable, awesome show. Yeah, live long and prosper.
Thanks, Clara. Are you going to stick around for a little bit?
I am gonna stick around for a little bit.
If there's any more food, you guys please eat it. And if you have more questions, feel free to ask.